The air in the courtroom smelled of lemon polish and old lies. I sat alone at the defendant's table, my hands folded neatly on the polished oak surface. I wasn't trembling. I wasn't crying. I was just observing. Across the aisle, the atmosphere was festive. It looked less like a legal proceeding and more like a family reunion, where the main course was going to be my dignity. My sister, Brenda, was wearing a pastel pink cardigan that I knew cost $300 because I was the one who paid off her credit card bill last Christmas. She was dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue, playing the fragile victim to perfection. Next to her sat my brother-in-law, Kyle. He was leaning back in his chair, the very picture of arrogance in a suit that was a little too shiny, a little too tight around the shoulders. He caught my eye and smirked, a slow, predatory curling of his lip. He leaned over the aisle divider, his voice a low hiss that only I could hear. "Your little real estate game ends here, Greta," he whispered. "By noon, that cottage is ours. And you'll be lucky if you have enough left to rent a basement." I didn't blink. I simply adjusted the cuff of my blazer. "We'll see, Kyle." Behind them sat my parents, Robert and Linda. Seeing them there, sitting firmly on the plaintiff's side, felt like a physical blow to the chest, even though I had expected it. My mother refused to look at me, her gaze fixed on her golden child, Brenda. My father was nodding along to whatever their lawyer was saying, his face set in a mask of righteous indignation. It was a perfect tableau of betrayal. The people I had supported for a decade were now gathered to pick the meat off my bones. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Harriet Thorne entered. She was a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair cut in a sharp bob, and eyes that looked like they could spot a lie from a mile away. She sat down, adjusted her glasses, and looked at the file before her with a weariness that suggested she had seen too much human greed for one lifetime. "Case number 4492, she read. "Miller vs. Vance. Dispute regarding ownership of the property located at 44 Lakeview Drive. Kyle's lawyer, a man named Mr. Sterling, no relation to my attorney, stood up. He was slick, loud, and clearly expensive. I wondered which of my past loans to Brenda was paying his retainer fee. "Your Honor," Mr. Sterling began, his voice dripping with faux concern. "We are here today to correct a grave injustice. My clients, Mr. and Mrs. Miller, along with the support of the defendant's own parents, are seeking to reclaim a family asset that was wrongfully appropriated by Ms. Greta Vance." He gestured toward me as if I were a disease in the room. "Ms. Vance has a history of extreme emotional fluctuations," he continued. "She is unmarried, holds no steady corporate job, and has often displayed signs of instability. 3 years ago, during a period of mental clarity, she agreed to transfer the vacation cottage to her sister, who has a growing family and genuine need for the property. But now, in a fit of jealousy and erratic behavior, she is refusing to honor that agreement." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I forced my breathing to remain steady. Instability. That was their angle. The woman who had balanced 3 jobs to pay for their mistakes was unstable. The woman who meticulously tracked every penny while they threw money at vacations and luxury cars was erratic. "Greta has always been difficult," my mother suddenly spoke up from the gallery. It wasn't allowed, but she couldn't help herself. "She's always been jealous of Brenda's happiness. We just want what's fair." Judge Thorne banged her gavel. "Order. Mrs. Vance, one more outburst and you will be removed." My lawyer, Arthur Sterling, a man of few words and immense intellect, placed a calming hand on my arm. "Let them talk, Greta," he whispered. "Let them dig the hole deep." I looked at Brenda. She was looking at the judge with wide, doe-like eyes. "We just want our house back," she mouthed, silent tears finally making an appearance. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. They didn't just want the cottage. They wanted to break me. They needed to believe that I was incompetent, that I was broken, because if I wasn't, then what did that make them? If I was the responsible one, the successful one, then they were just leeches. And their ego couldn't handle that reality. Kyle turned to look at me again, tapping his watch. Tick-tock, his eyes said. Give up. I looked down at the notepad in front of me. On it, I had written a single date, August 14, 2008. The day everything changed. The day I stopped being their daughter and started being an architect of my own survival. They thought they were suing a lonely spinster for her one nice possession. They thought they were taking candy from a baby. They had no idea that they had just walked into a lion's den, and I was the one holding the key to the gate. Mr. Sterling, the judge said to their lawyer. You may proceed with your opening statement. Thank you, Your Honor. We will prove that Greta Vance coerced her family, manipulated documents, and is mentally unfit to manage this asset. We are asking for immediate transfer of the title to the rightful owners, the Millers. My heart hammered against my ribs, a war drum of adrenaline. Let them come, I thought. I brought receipts. The morning session was a masterclass in gaslighting. If I hadn't lived my own life, I might have believed the story Kyle's lawyer was spinning. Mr. Sterling, theirs, not mine, paced back and forth, projecting a series of emails onto the courtroom screen. They were real emails, written by me, but sliced and diced until they bled a different meaning. Exhibit A, he announced. An email from Ms. Vance to her sister, dated 2 years ago. The screen read, I can't give you the house. It's too much. I'm drowning here. You see, Your Honor, he boomed. She admits it. She says I can't give you the house, implying there was an agreement to give it. And she claims she is drowning. Evidence of her financial and emotional inability to manage the property. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. That email was actually about them asking me to pay for their second honeymoon to Italy while I was in the middle of a massive renovation project on a commercial building. The full sentence was, I can't give you the money for the house rental in Tuscany. It's too much. I'm drowning in work here. They had cropped it. They had literally cropped the context out of my life. And here he continued, flashing a photo of the cottage. It was a charming place, 2 stories, nestled by the lake, with a wraparound porch I had sanded and stained with my own hands. The Lakeview Haven. A family retreat. Mr. Miller has paid for maintenance. Mrs. Miller has decorated it. Ms. Vance. She rarely visits. She holds onto it out of spite. Objection, Arthur, my lawyer, said calmly. Relevance of visitation frequency. Overruled, Judge Thorne said, though her eyes narrowed slightly as she looked at Kyle. Go on. Kyle was beaming. He looked like a cat who had just swallowed a canary and found it delicious. He leaned over to Brenda and whispered something that made her giggle. A giggle. In court. While they were trying to strip me of my assets. Then came the character witnesses. First, it was my mother. She took the stand, clutching her handbag as if it contained the last shred of decency in the room. Mrs. Vance, the opposing lawyer, asked softly. Tell us about Greta's relationship with money and family. My mother sighed, a tragic sound. Greta, she's always been obsessed with money. Hoarding it. Even as a child. She never shared. Brenda, my sweet Brenda, she gives everything she has. But Greta? She counts every penny. It's a sickness, really. We've tried to help her, to show her that family is more important than bank accounts, but... She wiped a tear. She uses her money to control us. To make us feel small. I felt a cold hollowness expand in my chest. Hoarding it. I thought about the tuition I paid for Brenda's kids. The medical bills for Dad's surgery. The loans for Kyle's failed startups that I knew I'd never see again. I hadn't hoarded money, I had been their ATM. And because I finally closed the account, I was now the villain. She told us, my mother continued, looking directly at the judge, that the cottage was for the family. For the grandchildren. But now she locks the doors. She changed the codes. Who does that to their own flesh and blood? Thank you, Mrs. Vance, the lawyer said. No further questions. Arthur didn't cross-examine her. We had a strategy. Wait. Let them lie. Then it was Kyle's turn. He adjusted his tie and sat in the witness box, exuding the confidence of a mediocre white man who has never faced a real consequence in his life. Mr. Miller, tell us about the contract, his lawyer prompted. Well, Kyle began, his voice smooth and practiced. We had a verbal agreement initially. Greta knew she couldn't handle the upkeep. She was struggling. Mentally. Financially. She came to me, crying, asking me to take it off her hands if I covered the taxes. I agreed to help her out. We signed a transfer agreement 3 years ago. But I made the mistake of leaving the paperwork with her to file. I trusted her. She's family. He shook his head sadly. She never filed it. And now she claims it never happened. It's heartbreaking. We are the ones who write the story of your life, Greta, he had said to me in the hallway earlier. Without us, you're nobody. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the sweat beading on his upper lip. I saw the slight tremor in his hands when he wasn't gripping the railing. He wasn't just greedy, he was desperate. Why? Why go to this length for a cottage worth maybe $400,000? Kyle liked to project that he was a millionaire. $400,000 shouldn't matter this much to him. Unless he wasn't a millionaire anymore. The realization hit me like a bolt of lightning. The frantic phone calls I'd ignored over the last few months. The way Brenda had stopped posting shopping hauls on Instagram. The shiny but worn suit. They weren't trying to steal the house just to have a vacation home. They were trying to steal it to liquidate it. He's lying, I whispered to Arthur. Arthur scribbled on his notepad. We know. Just wait for the judge to turn the page. The opposing lawyer rested his case. Your Honor, the evidence is clear. The defendant is an unstable, jealous woman reneging on a contract to harm her loving family. We ask that the court enforce the transfer immediately. The courtroom fell silent. All eyes turned to the defense. To me. Arthur stood up. He didn't have a flashy PowerPoint. He didn't have a weeping mother. He simply picked up a thick binder, a binder that was about 4 inches thick, and walked toward the bench. Your Honor, Arthur said, his voice deep and resonating like a church bell. Before we address the fictional contract presented by the plaintiffs, I believe it is essential to establish the true context of my client's assets. The plaintiffs claim Ms. Vance is financially unstable and incapable of managing a single cottage. He handed the binder to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Thorne. I would like to direct the court's attention to tab 1 through tab 12, Arthur said. Judge Thorne opened the binder. Her face was neutral, bored even. She flipped the first page. Then the second. Then she stopped. Her eyebrows shot up toward her hairline. She adjusted her glasses, leaning closer to the document. She looked up at me, then back at the binder, then over at Kyle and Brenda, who were still wearing their smug, victorious smiles. The air in the room shifted. It became heavier, charged with static electricity. Judge Thorne cleared her throat. It was a loud, sharp sound that cut through the silence. Mr. Sterling, the judge addressed my lawyer, but her eyes were locked on me. Miss Manning, excuse me, Miss Vance. This address listed here, the cottage at 44 Lakeview Drive. Yes, Your Honor. Arthur said. This is. The judge paused, flipping a few more pages, her expression turning from surprise to something resembling amusement. This is merely item number 4 in this portfolio. That is correct, Your Honor, Arthur said. And? The judge looked at Kyle, a small, cold smile playing on her lips. I see here a list of 12 properties. 12. Including commercial real estate, multifamily units, and good heavens, the Phoenix lofts. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum, sucking the oxygen out of the room. Brenda's smile faltered. 12, she whispered, loud enough to be heard. What does she mean, 12? The word 12 hung in the air like a guillotine blade waiting to drop. For a few seconds, nobody moved. My parents looked confused, squinting as if they were trying to solve a complex math problem. Kyle's smirk had frozen, turning into a grotesque grimace. Judge Thorne looked up from the binder, her gaze piercing through the facade of the concerned family. Counselor, the judge said to Kyle's lawyer. Are you aware of the defendant's full asset portfolio? Mr. Sterling, theirs, looked flustered. He shuffled his papers. Your Honor, we were under the impression that the defendant was of modest means. An administrative assistant, I believe. I stifled a laugh. Administrative assistant. That was the job I had 15 years ago. The job they thought I still had because they never bothered to ask me about my life. They only ever called to talk about themselves. An administrative assistant, Judge Thorne repeated, her tone dry. Well, she seems to be a very successful one. According to these certified deeds and tax records, Ms. Vance is the sole owner of a real estate portfolio valued in the 8 figures. 8 figures, my father blurted out. That's impossible. She drives a 2015 Honda. It's called being prudent, Mr. Vance, I said, breaking my silence. My voice was calm, but it carried to the back of the room. Wealth screams, wealth whispers. You wouldn't know the difference. Order. The judge banged the gavel, but she didn't look angry. She looked intrigued. Miss Vance, this address at 44 Lakeview Drive, this is the property in dispute. Yes, Your Honor, I replied, standing up. It is one of the smaller properties in my residential hold. I purchased it as a distressed asset 6 years ago and restored it myself. One of the 12, the judge mused, flipping the page again. I must say, looking at the structural reports and the renovation budgets included here, this is not the work of an unstable person. This is the work of a meticulous investor. She turned her gaze to Kyle. Mr. Miller, you claimed earlier that Ms. Vance was drowning and begged you to take the property off her hands. Kyle stood up, his face turning a blotchy red. It's a trick. She's forging documents. There is no way Greta owns all this. She's Greta. She fixes coffee. She doesn't own buildings. These are certified records from the county clerk and the state treasury, Arthur interjected smoothly. And if Mr. Miller would like to visit the Phoenix lofts downtown, he might recognize the building. I believe his own company, Miller Tech, rents a suite on the 3rd floor. The color drained from Kyle's face completely. He looked like he had just seen a ghost. She owns the building. Kyle whispered, his voice cracking. My office. Technically, Vance Holdings LLC owns it, Arthur corrected. Which is wholly owned by Ms. Greta Vance. Brenda grabbed Kyle's arm, her nails digging into his suit jacket. Kyle. What is going on? You said she was broke. You said we could take the house easily. She lied to us, my mother shrieked, standing up and pointing a trembling finger at me. You deceitful child. You sat at our dinner table, wearing those cheap clothes, letting us pay for your, wait, we paid for dinner, and you were sitting on millions. How could you betray us like this? The audacity was breathtaking. They were angry not because I had lied, but because I had money that they hadn't been able to spend. I didn't lie, Mother, I said coldly. I just didn't tell you. There's a difference. And judging by this lawsuit, I made the right choice. This changes the complexion of the claim regarding financial instability, Judge Thorne noted, closing the binder with a heavy thud. However, the plaintiff alleges there is a signed contract transferring the Lakeview property. Regardless of Ms. Vance's wealth, if she signed the contract, she signed it. We have the contract. Kyle's lawyer shouted, trying to regain control of the sinking ship. We have the document right here. Signed 3 years ago. Then present it, the judge said. I sat back down. The adrenaline was humming in my veins. The reveal of the properties was a massive blow, but it wasn't the kill shot. They still had the forged contract. And they were sticking to their lie. But as I looked at their panicked faces, my mind didn't stay in the courtroom. It drifted back. Back to the moment where the Greta they thought they knew, the pushover, the doormat, died. The moment I learned that love in this family was conditional, and the price was too high. 8 years ago. The kitchen table. The memory was so vivid I could smell the over-roasted chicken my mother always made on Sundays. I was 23. I had just finished my first 2 years of college, working nights as a waitress to pay for my books, but relying on my parents for the tuition, as they had promised. I was studying architecture and business. I had a 4.0 GPA. I was on the dean's list. I sat at the table, excited to show them my grades. But the atmosphere was weird. Brenda was there, beaming, a diamond ring sparkling on her finger. Kyle, her new fiancé back then, was pouring champagne. We have an announcement, my mother squealed, clapping her hands. Brenda and Kyle are getting married. And it's going to be the wedding of the century. That's great, I said, genuinely happy for her. Congratulations. We've booked the Grand Hotel, my father said, puffing on a cigar. 500 guests. Imported flowers. A live orchestra. I did a quick mental calculation. Wow. That sounds expensive. Can we afford that? The room went quiet. My mother exchanged a look with my father. Well, my father said, clearing his throat. That's what we need to talk to you about, Greta. My mother reached across the table and patted my hand. Her hand felt cold. Honey, you know how much this wedding means to Brenda. She's found a good man. A provider. This is her future. Okay. I said slowly, a pit forming in my stomach. We've looked at the finances, my father said, refusing to meet my eyes. And with the deposit for the Grand Hotel, and the catering, well, we can't do both. Both what? I asked, though I already knew. We can't pay for your tuition next semester, my mother said. Just like that. As if she were telling me they were out of milk. And probably not for the rest of your degree. I stared at them. The noise of the room seemed to suck away. But you promised. You set aside a college fund. We're using the fund for the wedding, Brenda chimed in, taking a sip of champagne. Greta, don't be selfish. This is my special day. You can just, I don't know, get a loan. Or maybe take a break from school. Honestly, do you really need a degree? You're smart, you can just work. You're taking my education money for a party? I asked, my voice trembling. It's not a party, my mother snapped. It's an investment. Brenda is marrying into the Miller family. She needs a proper send-off. Look, Greta, let's be realistic. You're a hard worker. You're tough. You can handle yourself. Brenda needs help. She's not like you. She's not like me. I repeated. You mean she's lazy? Watch your mouth, my father slammed his hand on the table. We have made a decision. The money goes to the wedding. You are cut off. Effectively immediately. You should be happy for your sister instead of making this about yourself. I looked at them. Really looked at them. I saw Brenda, smirking, twisting her ring. She knew she was robbing my future, and she didn't care. I saw my parents justifying their favoritism as helping. I saw my own worth in their eyes, zero. I was the draft horse, Brenda was the show pony. Something inside me broke. But it wasn't a loud break. It wasn't a scream. It was a snap. Like a dry twig stepping on in a winter forest. The tears that had been threatening to spill suddenly evaporated. The heat in my chest turned to ice. A strange, crystal-clear clarity washed over me. They don't love you, a voice in my head whispered. They use you. And if you stay here, they will consume you until there is nothing left. I stood up. Where are you going? My mother asked, annoyed. We haven't cut the cake. I'm leaving, I said. My voice sounded different. Deeper. Older. Sit down, Greta, my father commanded. No. I walked to my room. I packed one bag. My clothes, my textbooks, my laptop. I left the family photos. I left the teddy bears. I walked back through the kitchen. They were still eating, laughing again, already moving on from the Greta problem. If you walk out that door, my father shouted after me, don't expect a dime from us. Ever. I stopped at the doorway. I turned back. I looked at the champagne, the ring, the smiles. Don't worry, I said. You won't have a dime to give me. I walked out into the night. It was raining. I had $400 in my bank account and nowhere to go. I slept in my car that night. And as I lay curled up in the back seat of my old Honda, watching the rain streak the windows, I made a vow. I will never ask them for anything. I will never let them control me. I will build something so big, so solid, that they can never tear it down. I didn't cry myself to sleep. I planned. Back in the present, the judge was examining the contract Kyle's lawyer had submitted. But my mind was still on the journey that started that rainy night. After the snap, I became a ghost. I worked double shifts at a diner. I cleaned houses on weekends. I dropped out of the expensive university and transferred to a community college, finishing my degree at night. I ate instant noodles. I lived in a basement apartment with no windows. I saved. God, did I save. Every dollar was a soldier in my army. 2 years later, while Brenda was posting photos of her second baby shower and complaining about her stressful life as a stay-at-home mom with a nanny, I bought my first property. It wasn't a mansion. It was a rotting carcass of a house on the wrong side of town. 142 Elm Street. It had fire damage, termites, and a smell that could kill a rat. You're crazy, the bank loan officer had told me. This place is a teardown. It has good bones, I told him. And it's all I can afford. I bought it for $50,000. I had $10,000 for renovations. That meant I couldn't hire contractors. I became the contractor. I spent my nights there, breathing in drywall dust and mold spores. I learned how to plumb a sink from YouTube videos. I learned how to lay tile by doing it wrong 3 times, and ripping it up until my fingers bled. I remember one night, about 3 months in. I was exhausted. I was covered in gray dust. I was eating a cold sandwich on the floor of the unfinished kitchen. My phone rang. It was my mother. I hadn't spoken to her in months. Greta, she said, her voice frantic. It's Brenda. Her husband. Kyle, he made a bad investment. They need $5,000 to cover the mortgage this month. We can't spare it right now. You're working all the time, surely you have some savings. I looked around my house. The walls were half-painted. The floor was bare plywood. My body ached in places I didn't know existed. I don't have it, I said. You're lying, she snapped. We know you worked 2 jobs. You just want to see your sister suffer. You're selfish, Greta. Just selfish. She hung up. I put the phone down. I took a bite of my sandwich. It tasted like drywall dust. But as I chewed, I looked at the wall I had just framed. It was straight. It was strong. It was mine. A month later, I finished the renovation. I put a "For Rent" sign in the yard. Mrs. Higgins was my first tenant. She was an elderly widow with a fixed income, and a cat named Mr. Whiskers. She walked into the small, clean, bright one-bedroom apartment I had created out of the rubble. "It's beautiful," she said, touching the fresh paint. "It feels safe." She handed me a check for the deposit and the first month's rent. $1,200. I held that check in my hand. It was more than just money. It was proof. Proof that I could create value. Proof that I didn't need them. That $1,200 covered the mortgage on the house and left me with $400 in profit. Cash flow. I didn't spend the profit. I put it in a separate account labeled Property Number 2. Mrs. Higgins stayed for 5 years. She never knew that her rent checks were the seeds of an empire. Every time she paid, I reinvested. I bought a duplex next. Then a fourplex. While Brenda was buying designer purses that depreciated the moment she left the store, I was buying distressed assets. While Kyle was networking at golf clubs and losing money on crypto scams, I was at city council meetings, learning about zoning laws and future development plans. I became obsessed. Not with money but with freedom. Each deed I signed was a brick in the wall I was building between me and my family's toxicity. But it wasn't all easy. There was Property Number 6. The one that almost broke me. Real estate isn't like it looks on TV. It's not just painting walls and counting cash. Sometimes it's a war. Property Number 6 was a historic commercial building downtown. I stretched myself thin to buy it. I leveraged the equity from the first 5 properties. It was a gamble. If it worked, I would move from landlord to developer. If it failed, I would lose everything. 2 weeks after closing, disaster struck. We found a crack in the main support beam. A structural engineer told me the foundation was shifting. The city slapped a stop work order on the door. "It's going to cost $150,000 to fix," the contractor told me. Cash. Up front. I didn't have $150,000. I had $20,000 in the bank. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. I was facing bankruptcy. The bank was threatening to foreclose not just on Number 6, but on all the collateral, my entire life's work. I was sitting in my car outside the crumbling building, having a panic attack. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was being crushed by the weight of that concrete beam. My phone rang. It was Brenda. "Hey, sis," she chirped. She sounded drunk. "Guess where we are?" "Cabo." "It's amazing. Kyle booked the presidential suite." I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. "That's nice, Brenda." "Yeah, but listen," her tone shifted. "Kyle's cards are acting weird. Probably a fraud alert or something because we're international. Can you transfer us, like, to Grand? Just until we get back. We're at dinner and the waiter is looking at us weird." I looked at the condemned sticker on my building. I looked at my bank balance on my other screen. I had enough for one more mortgage payment on my own apartment, or I could send them money for lobster and tequila. "Brenda," I said, my voice shaking. "I can't. I'm in trouble. The new building, there are structural issues. I might lose everything." Silence on the line. Then a sigh. "Ugh, Greta, always with the drama," she said. "It's just a building. We're talking about embarrassing us in front of people. We're family. Why do you always have to make everything about you? I might go bankrupt, I whispered. Well, maybe you shouldn't have bought it then, she snapped. Kyle said you play out of your league. Look, just send the money, okay? Mom said you would. Something in me died that day. The last tiny ember of hope that they cared about me, not as a wallet but as a human being, was extinguished. No, I said. What? No. I'm not sending it. Wash dishes if you have to. I hung up. I blocked her number. Then I got out of the car. I wiped my face. I walked into the construction site. I didn't have the money to hire the big firm. So I went to the library. I read every code book on foundation repair. I found a smaller, hungry contractor. I negotiated. I offered him a percentage of future equity in exchange for lower upfront costs. I sold my car. I moved into one of my vacant units to rent out my own apartment. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for 6 months. I worked side by side with the laborers, hauling concrete, sweating, bleeding. I saved property number 6. 6 months later, I sold it for a 200% profit. That sale bought the Phoenix Lofts. That fire didn't burn me. It forged me. Back in the courtroom, I looked at Brenda. She was whispering to her lawyer, probably complaining about the air conditioning. She had never hauled a bag of concrete in her life. She had never faced the abyss. And that was why she was going to lose. Mr. Sterling, Judge Thorne's voice brought me back to the present. I am still waiting for an explanation regarding these assets. Arthur, my lawyer, decided it was time to twist the knife. Your Honor, Arthur said, pressing a button on the remote control. A large screen descended on the courtroom wall. Since the plaintiffs have questioned my client's capability, allow us to present the reality of Greta Vance's instability. The first image appeared. It was the Phoenix Lofts, a gleaming glass and steel tower downtown. Property number 10, Arthur narrated. Acquired 3 years ago. Ms. Vance oversaw the complete renovation of this derelict warehouse into the city's premier luxury living space. Current valuation, $12.5 million. Gasps ripple through the courtroom. My mother's hand covered her mouth. My father's jaw literally dropped. Click. The next image. The Grand Majestic Theater. Property number 12, Arthur continued. A historical landmark. Ms. Vance saved it from demolition last year. She is currently working with the Historical Society to restore it as a performing arts center. She didn't just buy it, she saved a piece of this city's soul. The judge nodded, clearly impressed. I attended the opening gala, she murmured. I had no idea the Vance Trust was one person. Click. A sleek, modern office park. Property number 8, Arthur said, turning to look directly at Kyle. The Miller Tech Plaza. I believe the plaintiff, Mr. Miller, knows this building well. Kyle looked like he was about to vomit. He should, Arthur said dryly. He's been late on the rent for his company's office there for the last 4 months. You. Kyle stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. You own the building. You've been reading my mail. You know about. He stopped himself. But it was too late. Know about what, Mr. Miller? Arthur asked. The eviction notices. Or the fact that your company is essentially insolvent. Objection. Mr. Sterling, there's, shouted, standing up. This is irrelevant. We are here about the cottage. Not Mr. Miller's business. It is entirely relevant to motive, Your Honor, Arthur countered. The plaintiffs claim they want the cottage for sentimental family reasons. We believe they are seeking to liquidate the asset to cover Mr. Miller's mounting gambling debts and business failures. That's a lie. Brenda screamed. She stood up, knocking her chair over. We are rich. We are the successful ones. She's the loser. She's the spinster with the cats. Sit down, Mrs. Miller. The bailiff moved forward. I looked at Brenda. Really looked at her. Beneath the expensive makeup, I saw the terror. She knew. She knew the money was gone. She knew Kyle was a fraud. But she had hitched her wagon to him, and now they were both going over the cliff. The portfolio speaks for itself, Arthur concluded, turning off the screen. Greta Vance is a self-made multimillionaire. She is not unstable. She is a genius. And she certainly did not need to ask her bankrupt brother-in-law to take a cottage off her hands, because she couldn't afford the property tax. The narrative they had built, the poor, crazy Greta, had just been nuked from orbit. But there was still the issue of the contract. Judge Thorne picked up the document Kyle's lawyer had submitted. This brings us back to this piece of paper. Mr. Miller claims Ms. Vance signed this transfer of deed 3 years ago. Ms. Vance claims she did not. She looked at me. Ms. Vance, is this your signature? I walked to the bench. I looked at the scrawl. It looked like my signature. A very good copy. It looks like my name, Your Honor, I said. But I did not sign it. She's lying. Kyle yelled. I watched her sign it. In my office. August 12th, 3 years ago. August 12th. Arthur asked. You are certain of the date? Absolutely, Kyle said, regaining some confidence. It was right before her birthday. She was crying. She said it was a gift to Brenda. And you witnessed it, the judge asked. Yes, Kyle said. And who else? My notary, Elena Rossi. She stamped it right there. I looked at Arthur. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. We had arrived at the trap. Before we sprung the trap on the signature, Arthur wanted to nail down the coffin on the why. Why did they sue me now? Why wait 3 years if they had a contract? Your Honor, Arthur said. We would like to call a surprise witness. Mr. Marcus Dean. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. A man in a sharp gray suit walked in. He looked angry. Kyle's face turned the color of ash. Marcus, he whispered. Marcus Dean was Kyle's former business partner. The one Kyle had blamed for his company's struggles. Marcus took the stand. He was sworn in. Mr. Dean, Arthur asked. Do you know the plaintiff, Kyle Miller? Unfortunately, Marcus grunted. Can you tell the court about the financial state of Miller Tech? It's a shell, Marcus said bluntly. Kyle drained the operating accounts 2 years ago. Crypto, gambling, luxury trips. He owes suppliers. He owes the IRS. And... Marcus paused, looking at Kyle with pure disgust. He owes some very dangerous people a lot of money. Objection. Hearsay. Kyle's lawyer shouted. I have the ledger, Marcus said, pulling a USB drive from his pocket. I was the CFO. I kept copies of everything before I quit. Kyle has a balloon payment due on a private hard money loan next week. $350,000. The courtroom murmured. $350,000. The approximate value of my cottage. So, Arthur said, connecting the dots for everyone. Mr. Miller needs exactly $350,000 by next week. And suddenly, a 3-year-old contract appears giving him ownership of a property worth $350,000. Arthur turned to the jury, though there wasn't one, he played to the room. This isn't a family dispute, Your Honor. This is a robbery in progress. They are using this court as a weapon to steal assets to pay off loan sharks. My parents looked sick. My father was clutching his chest. Kyle, my father rasped. Is this true? You told me the business was booming. You told me you needed the cottage for the grandkids. Kyle didn't answer. He was staring at the table, sweat dripping down his nose. Brenda, however, wasn't done. Denial is a powerful drug. He's lying, she screeched, pointing at Marcus. He's just jealous because Kyle fired him. Kyle is a visionary. And even if we have debts, the house is ours. Greta gave it to us. The contract is real. She looked at me, her eyes wild. You signed it, Greta. Admit it. You wanted to help us. You loved us once. I looked at her. I did love you, Brenda. That's why I paid your tuition. That's why I paid for your car. That's why I kept your secrets. But I didn't sign that paper. Prove it, she screamed. It's your word against ours. And we have a notary stamp. Judge Thorne looked at the contract again. She held it up to the light. The witness makes a compelling case for motive, the judge said. Mr. Miller has a desperate need for cash. Ms. Vance has a vast fortune and no need to sell. The logic suggests fraud. But logic isn't evidence. The signature is here. The notary seal is here. She looked at Arthur. Mr. Sterling, unless you can prove this document is a forgery physically, the court finds itself in a difficult position. A notarized document carries the presumption of truth. Kyle looked up. Hope flickered in his eyes. He thought he had survived the exposure of his bankruptcy. If he could just get the house, he could pay off the loan sharks and live to scam another day. We have the notary, Kyle said breathlessly. Elena. Call Elena. She'll tell you. Arthur smiled. It was a terrifying smile. Actually, Arthur said. We don't need the notary. We have something better. Science. Arthur reached into his bag and pulled out a small, sealed plastic evidence bag. Inside was a black ballpoint pen. Your Honor, Arthur said. The plaintiffs claim this document was signed 3 years ago. August 12, 2021. Is that correct? Yes. Kyle said. I remember the day perfectly. And you remember the pen Greta used? Arthur asked. You said in your deposition it was a specific pen from your desk. A Miller Tech branded promotional pen with blue ink. Yes, Kyle said, wary now. She used my pen. So what? And this is the contract. Arthur pointed to the paper on the judge's bench. Yes. And the ink on that paper is blue. Yes. Get to the point. Arthur turned to the judge. Your Honor, I would like to call our final expert witness. Dr. Eris Thorne. No relation, just a happy coincidence. He is a forensic ink specialist. A small man with thick glasses walked in. He was carrying a microscope. Kyle looked at the pen. He looked at the contract. He looked at me. I allowed myself a small smile. Checkmate, brother. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning unit 3 floors down. Everyone was looking at Dr. Eris Thorne, the forensic ink specialist. He was a small man, unassuming, the kind of person you would walk past in a grocery store without a second glance. But in that moment, he held the power of a god. He adjusted his microscope and connected it to the large screen Arthur had used earlier. Dr. Thorne, Arthur began, his voice calm and melodic. Please explain to the court what you analyzed. Certainly, Dr. Thorne said. His voice was dry, precise. I analyzed the ink composition on the document titled Transfer of Deed, dated August 12, 2021. Specifically, I compared it to the reference sample provided, a standard blue ballpoint pen from Miller Tech, which the plaintiff, Mr. Miller, confirmed was the instrument used. Arthur nodded. And what did you find? The ink is a ballpoint paste, Dr. Thorne continued. However, ink is not just colored water. It is a complex chemical formula that changes over time as manufacturers tweak their recipes for viscosity, drying time, and color fastness. This particular ink contains a specific tagging agent, a fluorescent polymer called Luminex 4. I looked at Kyle. He was no longer sweating. He was pale, a wax figure melting under a heat lamp. He didn't know what Luminex 4 was. Neither did I. But we were all about to learn. Is Luminex 4 common? Arthur asked. It is now, Dr. Thorne said. But here is the anomaly. The manufacturer of this ink, a supplier based in Germany, only introduced the Luminex 4 formula into their production line in January of this year. They did this to comply with new European environmental regulations that came into effect 6 months ago. The implication hung in the air for a second before it landed with the weight of a sledgehammer. So, Arthur said, turning to look directly at Kyle. You are telling this court that the ink used on this document, which is dated 3 years ago, was chemically impossible to exist until 6 months ago. That is correct, Dr. Thorne said. It is a temporal impossibility. Unless Ms. Vance is a time traveler, she could not have signed this document in 2021 with a pen containing ink manufactured in 2024. The reaction in the courtroom was visceral. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Even the bailiff raised an eyebrow. Kyle stood up, knocking his chair back against the railing with a loud clatter. That's that scientific mumbo-jumbo. You paid him. You paid him to say that. Sit down, Mr. Miller. Judge Thorne barked. Her voice wasn't bored anymore. It was sharp, dangerous. It's a lie. Kyle screamed, his composure shattering completely. He turned to his wife. Brenda, tell them. Tell them she signed it. Brenda looked at Kyle, then at the judge, then at the screen where the spectral analysis of the ink was displayed. The realization was dawning on her face. The house of cards wasn't just falling, it was burning. Brenda stammered. I wasn't in the room. You said you told me she signed it. You traitor. Kyle hissed at her. Mr. Sterling, the judge addressed Kyle's lawyer. Do you have a rebuttal for this expert testimony? Or perhaps a time machine you'd like to enter into evidence? The opposing lawyer looked at his client, then at the evidence. He closed his briefcase. No, Your Honor. I have no questions for this witness. He knew it was over. He was already mentally calculating how to distance himself from the disbarment hearing that might be in his future. But Arthur wasn't done. He wanted to make sure there was no ambiguity. One final thing, Your Honor, Arthur said. Since the ink proves the document was created recently, specifically within the last 6 months, that aligns perfectly with the timeline of Mr. Miller's financial crisis. He didn't sue because Greta broke a contract. He forged a contract because he needed to sue. Arthur turned to me. I met his eyes. We had won. But it wasn't just about winning the case. It was about exposing the rot. I looked over at my parents. My mother was weeping, but not for me. She was weeping because she realized the wealthy son-in-law she had bragged about was a fraud, and the daughter she had discarded was a tycoon. My father sat with his head in his hands, unable to look at anyone. The humiliation was total. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't joy. It was relief, so profound it felt like I was floating. The heavy cloak of their judgment, which I had worn for 15 years, simply dissolved. Do you see what happened here? Do you see how detail matters? They thought they could bully me with a story, but I fought back with physics. The scientific evidence was the nail in the coffin, but Judge Thorne wasn't done. She was a woman who cared about the law, but she also cared about the truth beneath the law. Ms. Vance, the judge said, looking at me. You may step down. Or, if you wish, you may make a final statement regarding the emotional damages claim. Your family has accused you of malice. Now is your chance to answer that accusation. I stood up. My legs felt strong. I walked to the stand, not as a defendant, but as a woman who had survived a war. I looked at the gallery. I looked at the people who shared my DNA. I don't want their money, I began, my voice steady. I have enough money. I have made more money in the last year than Kyle has made in his entire life. Kyle flinched, but he couldn't look up. They accused me of hiding my success, I continued. They called it malice. They called it selfishness. But it wasn't selfishness. It was self-preservation. I turned to my parents. My mother looked up, her mascara running down her cheeks. 8 years ago, I said, speaking directly to them. You sat me down at the kitchen table and told me I wasn't worth the investment. You took my tuition money, money I had counted on, money you promised, and you threw a party with it. You bought flowers that died in a day and champagne that was drunk by strangers. Greta, please, my mother sobbed. We didn't know. You didn't know what? I asked. You didn't know I would succeed. Or you didn't know I would remember. The courtroom was deadly silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing for a second. You told me to find a husband because I had no talent. You told me my only value was in who I married. Well, look at who Brenda married. I gestured to Kyle, who was now trembling visibly. She married a liar and a thief. And I married my work. I married my ambition. And I have never cheated on myself. I hid my properties because I knew, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. I knew that if you knew I had money, you wouldn't love me more. You would just use me more. You would have drained me dry to prop up Brenda's fantasies and Kyle's failures. I wasn't your daughter. I was your insurance policy. And I decided to cancel the policy. My father looked up then. His eyes were red. We are your parents, Greta. Doesn't that mean anything? It means you should have protected me, I replied. It means you should have believed in me. But you didn't. You bet on the wrong horse. And now you're angry because the horse you starved won the race. I turned back to the judge. Your Honor, this lawsuit wasn't about a cottage. It was a shakedown. It was an attempt to punish me for surviving without them. They wanted to break me because my wholeness reminds them of their brokenness. I am asking not just for dismissal but for peace. I want them out of my life. Permanently. I stepped down. As I walked back to my table, I passed Brenda. She wasn't crying anymore. She was staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. It was the look of someone who realizes they have lost their power and has nothing left but venom. I hope you die alone in your big houses, she hissed. I stopped. I leaned down so only she could hear. Better to be alone in a mansion, Brenda, than in a prison cell with your husband. I sat down next to Arthur. He patted my hand. Well said, Greta. Well said. The emotional weight of the moment was suffocating. I felt lightheaded. It's a strange thing, standing up to the people who raised you. It feels like cutting off a limb. You know it's gangrenous, you know it's killing you, but it's still a part of you. But as I looked at my parents, huddled together, looking old and small, I realized the limb had been dead for a long time. I was just finally burying it. The judge cleared her throat. She shuffled the papers on her desk. She took the pen, the real pen, and began to write. I have heard enough, Judge Thorne said. I don't need a recess. The facts are plain. The malice is evident. And the fraud is, frankly, insulting to this court. She looked at Kyle. Mr. Miller, please stand. Kyle stood up. He looked like he was about to faint. And Mrs. Miller and Mr. and Mrs. Vance. All of you. Stand up. They stood, a jagged line of defeat. In 20 years on the bench, the judge began, I have seen families fight over millions. I have seen them fight over china sets. But I have rarely seen a conspiracy so clumsy, so greedy, and so morally bankrupt as this one. She picked up the contract. This document is a forgery. That is a fact established by science. But the intent behind it is what disturbs me most. She looked at my parents. You enabled this. You sat there and testified against your own daughter, characterizing her as mentally unstable, simply to help your other daughter steal from her. That is not parenting. That is predation. My mother let out a wail. My father slumped. And you, Mr. Miller, the judge's eyes hardened. You thought you could use my courtroom as a bank. You thought you could deceive me to pay your debts. She raised her gavel. Here is the order of this court, Judge Thorne announced, her voice ringing with finality. First, the plaintiff's request for transfer of the deed to 44 Lakeview Drive is denied with prejudice. The property belongs solely to Greta Vance. The plaintiffs are permanently enjoined from entering this property, or any other property owned by the Vance Trust. Second, she continued, looking at Kyle. Regarding the document submitted as evidence. I am referring this matter immediately to the District Attorney's Office for Criminal Prosecution. I am recommending charges of perjury, forgery, and attempted grand larceny. No. Brenda screamed. You can't. He's a father. He didn't mean it. He meant every word of it when he thought he was going to win, the judge snapped. Bailiffs, please take Mr. Miller into custody pending the DA's arrival. I consider him a flight risk given his financial desperation. 2 bailiffs moved in. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut was the loudest sound I had ever heard. Kyle didn't fight. He just wept, ugly, snot-filled sobs. Third, the judge went on, ignoring the commotion. Mr. and Mrs. Vance and Mrs. Miller. You are ordered to pay the defendant's legal fees in their entirety. Furthermore, given the frivolous and malicious nature of this suit, I am awarding punitive damages to Ms. Vance in the amount of $50,000, to be paid jointly and severally by the plaintiffs. My father looked like he had been shot. $50,000. We don't have that kind of money. We gave it all to. He looked at Kyle, who was being led away. We gave it to him. Then I suggest you sell something, the judge said coldly. Perhaps you can ask your golden child for a loan. And finally, Judge Thorne looked at me. Her expression softened. Ms. Vance. I am granting a permanent restraining order. None of these people are to contact you, approach you, or come within 500 feet of you or your businesses. If they do, they go to jail. She banged the gavel. Case closed. The room erupted. Reporters who had drifted in when rumors of the real estate tycoon started circulating were shouting questions. Brenda was trying to claw her way to Kyle, screaming that it was all a mistake. My mother was slumped on the bench, being fanned by my father. Arthur packed up his binder. A clean sweep, he said. Are you all right, Greta? I stood there, watching the chaos. I watched Kyle being dragged out the side door. I watched Brenda turning on my parents, screaming, You said this would work. You said she was weak. I watched my parents look at Brenda with horror, finally seeing her for what she was, not a princess, but a monster they had created. I'm fine, Arthur, I said. I'm better than fine. I walked out of the courtroom. I didn't look back. In the hallway, I ran into Marcus, Kyle's old partner. He was leaning against the wall, smiling. Nice show, he said. Thanks for the ledger, I said. Pleasure was mine. Watching him get cuffed. Best Tuesday I've had in years. He paused. You know, Miller Tech Plaza, it's a nice building. If you ever need a new property manager who actually pays rent, call my office, Marcus, I said, handing him a card. We can talk. I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright afternoon sun. The air tasted different. It tasted sweet. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah, my assistant. Sarah, the Historical Society just called. They approved the final plans for the theater. And there are 3 voicemails from your sister. Do you want me to listen to them? I typed back, no. Delete them. And block the number. I walked to my car, my sensible, reliable 2015 Honda. I sat in the driver's seat and just breathed. For 10 years, I had been running. Running from their judgment, running from their expectations, running to prove I was enough. Now I could stop running. I had built a fortress, and the enemy had broken themselves against its walls. I started the engine. I wasn't going back to the apartment. I was going to the cottage. My cottage. The drive was 2 hours, but it felt like 5 minutes. When I pulled into the driveway of 44 Lakeview Drive, the sun was setting over the water. The house looked beautiful, the white siding glowing pink in the twilight, the porch waiting for me. It was small. Compared to the Phoenix Lofts or the theater, it was nothing. But it was the only place that felt like a home. I walked up the steps. I punched in the code. The door unlocked with a satisfying click. I walked inside. It smelled of lavender and cedar. It was silent. No screaming sister. No demanding parents. Just peace. I went to the fridge and pulled out a bottle of wine I had left there months ago. I poured a glass and walked out onto the back porch. The lake was a mirror, reflecting the purple sky. I thought about Kyle in his holding cell. I thought about my parents driving home in silence, realizing they had lost both their daughters, one to prison and greed, the other to indifference. I took a sip of wine. It was the best wine I had ever tasted. 6 months later. The grand majestic theater was buzzing with electricity. It was opening night. The crystal chandeliers, which I had spent 3 weeks sourcing from an antique dealer in Austria, shimmered overhead. The velvet curtains were rich and heavy. I stood on the balcony, looking down at the crowd. The city's elite were there. The mayor. The investors. The artists. Ms. Vance. I turned. It was a young woman, maybe 22. She was holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres, but she was looking at me with wide, nervous eyes. Yes. I smiled. I just wanted to say thank you, she stammered. I'm one of the recipients of the Vance Scholarship. For architecture students. Ah, yes. The scholarship. I had set it up the week after the trial. It was funded entirely by the rent from the Miller Tech building. Marcus had turned the company around, and he paid his rent on time. I specifically designed it for students who had been cut off by their families, or were working their way through school without support. What's your name? I asked. Maya, she said. My parents, they didn't want me to study design. They wanted me to be a nurse. When I refused, they stopped paying. I was going to drop out. But then I got your letter. I looked at Maya. I saw the tiredness in her eyes, the calluses on her fingers from making models, the hunger to succeed. I saw myself. You're welcome, Maya, I said, touching her shoulder. Keep building. Don't let anyone tell you your blueprints are wrong. She smiled, a brilliant, hopeful smile, and walked away. That smile was worth more than all the approval my parents had never given me. I hadn't heard from them in 6 months. The restraining order worked. I heard through the grapevine, meaning Mrs. Higgins, who apparently knew everyone's business, that they had sold their big house and moved into a small condo. They had to liquidate assets to pay the judgment and Kyle's legal fees. Kyle was currently serving a 3-year sentence for fraud. Brenda had filed for divorce, claiming she was a victim too, but nobody bought it. She was working as a receptionist at a dental office. The irony wasn't lost on me. I took a sip of champagne and looked back at the stage. The orchestra was tuning up. I was alone on the balcony, but I wasn't lonely. There is a profound difference. Loneliness is the absence of people. Solitude is the presence of oneself. I had found myself. I thought about the golden child and the scapegoat. It's a story as old as time. But stories can be rewritten. I wasn't the victim anymore. I wasn't even the survivor. I was the architect. I had designed a life that fit me perfectly. The lights dimmed. The conductor raised his baton. The first note of the symphony soared into the air, filling the restored theater with sound. It was triumphant. It was complex. It was beautiful. It sounded like freedom. I closed my eyes and let the music wash over me. I thought about the 23-year-old girl sleeping in her car in the rain. I wished I could go back and tell her, hold on. It gets better. You are going to build castles. But maybe she knew. Maybe that snap in her heart was the sound of the foundation being laid. Life is funny. It breaks you down to build you up. My family tried to break me to steal a cottage. Instead, they gave me the motivation to build a kingdom. And the best part? The keys to the kingdom were in my pocket, and this time, I wasn't making any copies. Thank you. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for walking through the fire with me. It wasn't easy to relive those moments, to admit how much it hurt to be unloved by the people who were supposed to love me most. But telling you it helps. If you are going through something similar, if you feel like you are the one always giving and never receiving, please listen to me, you are enough. You are capable. And you don't owe anyone your future just because you share a past. You have made it to the very end of this journey with me. You are the true friends I wish I had back then. Please type the letter A in the comments right now. Let me see who the real ones are. Let me see who stayed until the curtain fell. Type A and tell me, what would you have done in my shoes? Would you have forgiven them? Or would you have done exactly what I did? I can't wait to read your thoughts. Stay strong. Build your own empire. And never, ever let them sign your name.